Today's episode is sponsored by Blinkist, the app that lets you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try Blinkist totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right below this video. We're still finding out details about this just unconscionable tragedy that took place in Beirut, Lebanon a couple of days ago, but we do now know enough that we can at least say a few things. On Tuesday, there was an absolutely gigantic explosion in Beirut, Lebanon, at warehouses that stored highly explosive materials. And the video of this explosion looks the way that nuclear weapons are often portrayed in Hollywood films. And it was, in fact, one of the largest explosions essentially in the history of humanity. Shockwaves smashed homes and ripped off building facades. And so far, the death toll is at 157. Now, just yesterday, it was at 113, so it's climbing rapidly. There's another 80 people currently unaccounted for, ominously, and more than 5,000 people have been injured. But those numbers are probably a fraction of what ultimately is going to be uncovered, tragically. The shockwave spread so far that 300,000 people were left without homes because even miles away, the impacts of this explosion were felt. Now, very early in the process of trying to figure out what happened on Tuesday, Donald Trump wildly talked about this as an attack. He said it looked like a bomb. And to be very clear, the reason I didn't report about this yesterday is I knew Trump had made those assertions with no evidence, and I didn't want to fall into similar type of speculation. And in fact, now, 2 days after the event, it appears that what Donald Trump floated was completely wrong. Now, I'll talk a little bit more later about him doubling down on that, but to focus on what we do know, this appears to have been close to 3,000 tons of ammonium nitrate, which can be used in fertilizers and in bombs, which was stored for years at the port in Beirut, Lebanon, after being seized. Now, it was stored incorrectly, it appears, without the proper safety measures. And so far, it looks like inaction and negligence are to blame for the explosion. The words terrorism, attack, bomb are not being used. And from what we know so far, it was very irresponsible for Donald Trump to use those words. There are reports that what triggered the explosion was maybe related to construction or repair work being done at a warehouse. It's still early, and even that has not yet been confirmed. And it is believed that these explosive materials had actually been sitting there for somewhere in the range of 6 to 7 years. So right at the blast site, it's complete devastation and death. In a sort of 1 mile radius area, there are partial and full building collapses and many, many injuries. In a 2+ mile radius from the blast, you start to go in the direction of windows blown out, damage to buildings, more on the injury side again. And there are damaged buildings all the way out to 6 miles from the blast, if you can imagine. So this is now a full-blown disaster zone. It's a catastrophe. Humanitarian groups are trying to get into the area to provide help, other nonprofits. And of course, everything is in the context of coronavirus. And that is significantly compounding the difficulty when you have a raging pandemic. Any kind of humanitarian mission becomes more difficult. And again, the blast is considered to be about 20% of the size of Hiroshima. I mean, just think about the magnitude of that. Now, again, there is almost no important global news story in 2020 in which our president does not become a reckless participant. And case in point, calling this an attack early, floating the idea of a bomb, was completely irresponsible. At first, it seemed maybe he was leaking information from a classified briefing he had received. Maybe he knew something that had not yet been made public. He didn't. He was just wildly speculating, again, showing that there's a level of irresponsibility that he just can't get away from as president of the United States. And I'm going to talk more later about Trump doubling down on it. But instantly you have right wingers posting everywhere on the internet. It is an attack because of what Donald Trump said. The reality is that we probably still don't know the whole story. But that type of speculation from a president is childishly irresponsible. And in fact, There's a long list of ammonium nitrate explosions, including here in the United States. You might even remember in 2013, there was an ammonium nitrate explosion in West Texas, which also led to speculation about terrorism and attacks and bombs. That's not what it was. 15 people did die there. So there can always be foul play. This is not an out of the world, unbelievable situation as it's been reported. And Trump's ignorance and irrational speculation, as always, causing more problems once again. OK, this is a sort of a complicated thing to discuss. But at some point, we, meaning the United States collectively, we are going to owe the world an explanation and an apology. And I don't mean just generally for Donald Trump, but I'm talking more broadly because of our failure on coronavirus. I'm talking broadly because of our failure to continue leading on climate change. I'm talking about our failure really to just hold back the advancement of humanity, instead regressing dramatically over the last 3.5 years and maybe for another 4. Now, to set the stage accurately, I'm not pretending that the United States nor the world were idyllic panaceas during the era of Barack Obama. That would be revisionist history. That would be wrong. That's certainly not the point of this segment, to pretend things were just perfect until Donald Trump became president. But as an example, we were at least an important part of thinking about how to deal with climate change when Barack Obama was president of the United States. We hadn't figured it out, certainly, but we were serious participants in the conversation. The Obama administration understood the U.S. is disproportionately, relative to our population, a big polluter, a big emitter of pollution and emissions. And we were taking it seriously. Not enough was done. We had not figured it out. But our role was at least respectable around the world. Our role now on climate change has gone from respectable to not respectable to having no role whatsoever, because we're actually a huge part of the problem. As Donald Trump has claimed that climate change is a hoax created by China, propped up oil and gas while loosening car emission standards. And the world has rightly started either ignoring us in these important climate change conversations or actually pointing out that we're a huge part of the problem. On coronavirus, of course, this administration has proven that it still matters who is president. We have seen arguably one of the worst responses in the world to the pandemic. I don't know how much time I have to spend on that today, since we've covered it almost daily for months. But suffice it to say, almost any functioning adult would have said, I don't need to lead this. Let's defer to the doctors, and we'd be better off, right? We didn't need anything outlandish to better handle coronavirus than the way this administration has handled it. We just needed some adult to say, oh, I'm not an expert in this, but I know who is. Let's allow them to lead the way. We've talked about voting Trump out as only being the first step. And that's true from a policy standpoint. But it's also true from the standpoint of defeating Trumpism. Defeating Trump will not instantly end Trumpism if Donald Trump loses in November and leaves the Oval Office in January. But there's another area in which defeating Donald Trump is only the first step, which is starting to rebuild our alliances around the world, starting to recover some semblance of respect from our historical allies and from the people of this planet. So this is not about being ashamed of the country, even though certainly you wouldn't be wrong to feel that right now as we have become a laughingstock. This is not about punishing Trump supporters, although there's no doubt that they are responsible for the fact that this president was elected. This is about realizing that part of being respected again and rebuilding those relationships is going to be an implicit apology, some kind of explanation as to our commitment to fixing the disaster that the United States has been globally during the time of Donald Trump. Now, if Donald Trump were to win in November, the case for such an apology and an explanation and a rehabilitation of our reputation becomes much more difficult. Almost 63 million people voted for Donald Trump in 2016. The reality is some number close to that or even more are going to vote for him again in 2020. The question, of course, is going to be, do enough additional people vote for Joe Biden such that Donald Trump loses in the Electoral College? Now, in the next segment, I'm going to talk about the reality that any view that thinks Biden's got this is not based in fact. And I'm going to go into detail about that after the break. But let's imagine, even if Donald Trump is defeated in November, there will still be the inconvenient and humiliating reality that somewhere between probably 60 and 65 million Americans, in all likelihood, will have seen the last 4 years of Trump and the disaster that it's been. And they will say, I'm voting for another 4. And they will vote for Donald Trump a second time. So how do we get out of this? Removing Donald Trump is only going to be step 0.1 in the process. The world deserves answers. The world deserves an explanation. We owe it to the world, and an explanation about how we will not allow the country to be hijacked by the non-thinking ideas of the 60 plus million people who, even if Trump loses in November, will have voted for another 4 years. So what is the path forward? I actually don't have the answers. I want to hear from you. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. We'll take a break and we'll follow up about this either tomorrow or next week.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist. And what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month, and you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Paul Smith and Stefan Byrne. Paul and Stefan, thank you for your support. And also a big thank you to Kristen Diesel, who is today's longtime sustaining member of the day. Kristen's been a member for almost 5 years. And I invite you to sign up for membership at joinpakman.com. You'll get the daily bonus show, world famous, as well as commercial-free audio and video streams of the entire show, the members-only newsletter, and so much more. Grab a membership at joinpakman.com. Okay, some interesting, I actually am glad to see on the David Pakman Show subreddit this morning, which is, of course, davidpakman.com/REDDIT, a post asking, is Trump making a comeback, linking to a bunch of different polling data, which seems to suggest that the huge lead that Biden maybe had about a month ago may be narrowing. Now, I am going to make the case in the next segment that there is no such lead. It's not a question of it's narrowing. It does not exist. And I will make the mathematical case. I will make a qualitative case for you as well. And I'm really glad that people on the subreddit are discussing that. Now, also, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but there have been allegations made that I eat mac and cheese with a spoon, which is really weird. Like, if you need a spoon for mac and cheese, it's really like a pasta soup. I use spoons only for desserts and soups, not for pasta. And I guess that in some circles this is considered controversial, but yes, I do eat mac and cheese with a fork. I think that that's the correct utensil. This is not really important given everything that we have going on, but somehow this triggered a lot of people in my audience, and I really don't know why. So if that's something you want to weigh in on, the place to do it would be the David Pakman Show subreddit, davidpakman.com/REDDIT. But the focus here, really important, to get back to the materially important things. I don't know, when people talk about, is Trump making a comeback? I don't know that Donald Trump needs to make a comeback, and that's what I want to really focus in on next. There are people in my audience and elsewhere who are getting too confident about the upcoming presidential election. I'm scared by it. You guys are scaring me. And so what I want to do today is to make the case that not only could Donald Trump win re-election, nothing major really needs to change for him to win re-election. He could be winning right now from an electoral college standpoint. So if you don't look at the details and you say, oh, Biden's plus 10, Biden's plus 12, there was a poll where Biden was plus 15. Seems like Biden's winning easily. And he's also winning key battleground states. Biden is going to run away with a historic electoral college victory. No. If by the end of this clip, I have not convinced you that we should be very careful of interpreting the data we have in that way, then I will have failed to do my job. I deserve to be canceled. Hello. If by the end of this segment, I've not convinced you that we need to be very, very careful about what's going on. So let's start with national polling. Whenever there's a poll that says Joe Biden is up 12, Joe Biden is up 10, Joe Biden is up 15, it gets a ton of attention. And certainly if Joe Biden wins the popular vote by 10, 12 or 15, Trump's done. That's not actually what the mathematical case today is. Let's look at the numbers today and understand the numbers. First of all, the polls that had Biden up 10, 12, and 15, we're not getting any more of those polls. OK, the last poll where Biden was up double digits was July 23rd. He was up 10. More recently, Biden is only up 3 in a number of polls. And on average, Biden is up by 6.4. 6.4 is very different than 15, my friends. So 6.4 still sounds pretty good. But understand that if you look at any individual poll, you have to understand the margin of error. Hugely important. So, for example, the latest YouGov poll has a 3.3% margin of error. So when the YouGov poll says that Biden is winning by 9, 49 to 40, Trump's 40 could actually be 43.3, and it would still be within the margin of error of the poll. Biden's 49 could really be 45.7. So a poll which promotes as a headline Biden plus 9 could really be Biden plus 2.4, and the poll would still be correct. This is why we have a confidence interval and a margin of error. If Biden is really only winning by 2.4, Trump could win the Electoral College. Remember, we have polling for the national popular vote, but we have an electoral college system. In 2016, Hillary won the popular vote by, I think it was 2.1 or 2.2, but lost the electoral college. So for people who are saying, what could happen to allow Trump to catch up to Biden? Nothing has to happen. Within the margin of error, today, Donald Trump has the support where he could win the electoral college if we have similar battleground results to those in 2016. You don't need an October surprise when the current lead for Trump might only be, the current lead for Biden might only be 2.4. Trump won 2016 with a 2.1% deficit in the popular vote. So that's national popular vote polling. Let's now go to step 2. You might say, Biden's winning hugely in key battleground states. Well, remember, in 2016, the national popular vote polls were accurate, but there were state polls that didn't get it right. State polls had some problems in 2016. So Hillary was winning the polling in Wisconsin going into the election. Trump won Wisconsin. That's just one example. So once you concede the national polling that looks like a big lead for Biden could actually be like a 2-point lead for Biden. State polling was off in some states in 2016. You have to come to the conclusion that Biden might not really be winning electorally right now. And then lastly, I talked about this yesterday. When you look at voter registration, it doesn't look that great. It is true that in many states, if you look only at new registrations, meaning people who have never been registered before, who maybe were not even 18 years old in 2016, when you look just at new registrations, Democrats have an advantage over Republicans. They've registered more new voters. But as I told you yesterday, in Florida, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Iowa, North Carolina, in terms of the number of registered Democrats versus Republicans today versus 2016, the advantage has been in favor of Republicans and against Democrats. And the reasons for this are people who have moved from one state to another, people who have switched party registrations, deaths. This is separate from who is going to choose to vote. But this is not the type of data you want to see if you want to be confident that Joe Biden is going to run away with this thing. So when you step back and you say, well, the polls, if you account for margin of error, look very similar to 2016. There were state polls in 2016 that were wrong. And then you realize, over the next 3 months, if the economy improves a little bit, if coronavirus gets better, if we get a vaccine or a good treatment that Trump will try to take credit for, a 1 or 1.5 point swing from where we are today in Trump's direction, and Trump wins the Electoral College. So I hope that I have convinced you that we need to be far more skeptical about these Biden's running away with it ideas that we are starting to see. You must run as if we are behind. This is going to be a huge fight. It actually doesn't look nearly as good as some are claiming. And I'm very worried. Some of you are worrying me that we are getting complacent, that some people think the data clearly points to Biden running away with this. Review this video if you need to. Fact check me. Go item by item. And if you do, you can come to only one conclusion, which is that there is not actually evidence to say right now that Joe Biden is going to easily win in November. He might win hugely and he might lose. And we're going to have to fight this. We're going to have more coverage of this on the show's Instagram page. David Pakman Show is our Instagram handle. While you are there, you can also follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. You should see what's going on in my backyard, which you can find out on my Instagram, david.pakman. We'll take a quick break and be back right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on your support, and the easiest way is through membership, which includes the world-famous bonus show, as well as commercial-free audio and video streams of the show just for members. Sign up today at joinpakman.com. Coupon code saves you 40%. Vote soon 18.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome back to the program today Congressman Ro Khanna, representing California's 17th district, located in the heart of Silicon Valley. Where to start, right? I mean, I think maybe the first place would be second stimulus, given what's going on with coronavirus, discussions of a payroll tax, discussions of an extension or expansion, and to what degree of this enhanced unemployment. What are your priorities? What do you think needs to happen and when?
Well, first, we have to be clear-eyed about what the problem is. The problem is that there are not enough jobs. I mean, people don't have enough money to pay basic rent, to get groceries. So when people say, oh, these unemployment checks are some disincentive to work, they're 5 times the job seekers as there are jobs. And the irony is that by not giving this money, it's not just that we're doing enormous damage to middle class and working class families. I mean, some are having foreclosures, some aren't being able to get enough nutritious food for their kids. It's also that we're damaging the economy because the economy is stalling if people don't have money to spend. So the priority has to be to stick to the $600, to get that extended through the end of the year, to get funding for states and localities. Of course, as you know, David, I've been pushing for $2,000 a month for people. That wasn't in the House bill, so I don't want to mislead people. It's unrealistic that's going to be in the cards for this. But we have to stick to the $600, the stimulus, and the fund money for state and local governments.
I was initially, at least sort of loosely, open to the idea of the payroll tax cut that has been floated by Donald Trump. I then changed my mind because I realized that it seems like a way to weaken Social Security and Medicare, and to then maybe use that deliberate weakening as a reason to justify further weakening or defunding. So I ended up deciding I didn't like it. And in particular, because the way I read it, it's only a holiday. It is not actually a cut. In other words, you would then, on your taxes when you file, potentially owe it back. And so I ended up saying I don't like it. Where are you on it?
Yeah, I don't think it makes sense, and particularly because we have the challenge now of businesses not opening. I mean, if you work for a restaurant or indoor dining, it doesn't matter if you have a payroll tax cut. That's not going to get you back to work until the virus is under control. And I don't see it getting under control until next year, until we have a vaccine and better therapeutics. So you could argue in a traditional recession, a payroll tax cut may provide some added incentive to hiring. It favors businesses over workers, but you may say, okay, we need it as one tool. But in a pandemic where the ability to create new jobs is restricted by public health, I don't think it makes sense.
So I'm curious whether you have any other, as a member of the House, insight into what we might call the real case numbers. And what I mean by that is a couple of examples are, we saw this leveling off after July 16th, which was exactly when data started going to HHS instead of the CDC. It's
Right.
a question mark, although I'm not alleging deliberate foul play yet. But then on top of that, Florida's numbers have gone down, but they stopped testing on Thursday because of the hurricane and only restarted yesterday. So that would be a very clear reason why we don't have a complete picture there. The California COVID-19 dashboard yesterday put up a message saying that for several days cases had been underreported, although the reason why is not yet clear to me. Are you working with the same data the public is working with? Do you have any other insights into more accurate data?
We're working with the same data. We don't get any briefing of better data. And I think whether it's deliberate, I don't know, but it's certainly not transparent. I mean, there's been a lot of obfuscation. There isn't a clear way of collecting this data. And the reality is it's the hospitalizations and the deaths that continue to be outrageous. I mean, especially when you look at other countries. So the cases, of course, matter, but no one can dispute the data that we still don't have this under control, given the amount of deaths that we're unfortunately facing and given the amount of hospitalization we're facing.
The topic of cases versus tests. If you don't test, you don't find cases. Case fatality rate versus deaths per capita. This all kind of exploded on Monday night in this interview that the president gave to Axios's Jonathan Swan. I'm guessing you saw the interview?
I did. I mean, and you know, it's very hard to look. The president has one skill. He's very good at marketing and branding, but you can't spin death. You can't market when hospitals are filled. And so he was trying to say when the relevant statistic is the percentage of people with cases who are dying. And it is true that that percentage has gone down as treatments have improved. But that is not the relevant statistic. The relevant statistic is not what percentage of people who are getting COVID are dying. The relevant statistic is why are so many Americans getting COVID compared to other countries. And I think the president was unable to spin his way out of that. He obviously understands the distinction. He's just hoping that he can fool people, but you can't fool people when it's their own public health.
That's interesting. So you think he does understand these issues in more detail than maybe he lets on, and he's spinning? Because I actually question whether he understands some of this stuff. Your sense is that it's deliberate and that it's optics.
I think in that case, I mean, I don't think he's deeply reflective, but I think he looks for the numbers that make the most sense, and he tries to put them out. If the death rates were lower, he would have to put that number out. So I think his modus operandi, his whole life has been take any news, exaggerate it a bit, make it sound great and to your advantage. And in many cases, that has worked with him with people who are busy in their lives and don't have the time to look through long articles. The challenge here is suddenly people are taking the time to pay attention because it's their own health, it's their parents' health, it's their neighbors' health. And so they have far more details. And when you have a situation of an engaged citizenry on an issue, Trump's strategy really falls flat. And that's why I think you've seen him struggling.
What do you think, or I guess let me rephrase it in a different way. I imagine that if you were scheduled to do an interview that your staff felt very strongly would potentially be a disaster, that logic would reach you and you might listen to advice that says this maybe isn't a good interview to do. The context is, how do you think these insane interviews are even happening with the president? Is it that he doesn't listen to his staff and that he believes he'll always come out on top? I mean, I'm trying to understand how these things are happening so frequently.
Yeah, I think from his perspective, he's succeeded, quote unquote, succeeded in a material sense at a lot of things he's done in life. He's managed to talk himself out of bankruptcies. He came out of nowhere and became president of the United States. And I think he has a lot of self-confidence and hubris that his view is the more exposure, the better, and that he can talk his way out of anything. And this is a common problem when people become president. Obviously, it's massively exaggerated in Trump's case, where he does not have the humility to see his own weaknesses. And I think that's creating a large amount of the problems for him.
So what does that get you thinking about in terms of potential Biden versus Trump debates? I've said from a practical standpoint, I can't think of an election I voted in where I care less about seeing debates. I mean, I just think I have more than enough information, uniquely so in this case, to make a decision, and that's to vote for Joe Biden. There's speculation about Joe Biden, the debates are better for Biden, or the debates are better for Trump. And a lot of that depends on, what your belief is about the cognitive state of either or both of them. What's your sense about the debates, not generally, but in this particular case?
Well, I think that Biden will debate and should debate, because I think the story of him not debating would be a much bigger deal and lead to speculation that is unfair and wrong. And I think people underestimate Biden. I mean, if you look, as you know, I co-chaired the Bernie Sanders campaign. We were very excited when we had a one-on-one opportunity with Biden. And I think everyone would tell you that Biden held his own. I mean, it was not a knockout punch for Bernie Sanders. If anything, I think it was probably a draw. So my sense is Biden's debate skills improved a lot through the course of the primary. And I think one of the mistakes Donald Trump is making is by putting all his chips in these debates and setting the bar so low. If Biden has a satisfactory performance, he's going to really, I think, get the upper hand. And I think Biden's perfectly capable of having a solid performance.
That's super interesting, because I remember that in the sort of Twitter Bernie space before the one-on-one debates, there were very high hopes that Joe Biden was going to implode, and that was going to be the moment at which Bernie took over. And as you mentioned, it really was a draw in a sense. I do think that the heavy focus on coronavirus probably helped Joe Biden to some degree, and there was less focus in that debate on other issues. But so even within the Bernie camp, there were high hopes about that one-on-one debate?
Yeah, no, I mean, that was sort of our final hope to try to shake up the race. Obviously, we were doing very well headed into Super Tuesday. We had a disappointing Super Tuesday. It was not anticipated that everyone would withdraw and endorse Biden. I mean, it's a free country. People can do that. But really, no one thought the establishment would coalesce around Biden that quickly. And so we needed a game changer. And we thought this debate was a place we could have one. I mean, Bernie, objectively, I think, had done much better in a lot of the debates leading up to that debate than Biden had. Yes. But Biden has exceeded expectations in that debate. And so he's certainly capable of doing that. And I think Trump is making a mistake if he's putting all his eggs in that basket.
So let's talk a little bit about the last 3 months here to the election, where every member of the House is up for re-election. 33 plus 2 Senate seats are available. And of course, it's the presidential election. There are some in my audience that are feeling very confident about the presidential piece, seeing polls that have Joe Biden doing very well. Today, I went through and pointed out, for example, in a recent poll where Joe Biden is winning by 9, when you look at the margin of error, that could be actually only a 2.4% lead for Joe Biden. And Hillary won by 2.2 in 2016 at the popular vote level, but lost the Electoral College. When I look at state by state polling, which looks quite good for Joe Biden, the state polling was not great in 2016. National was good. In other words, Hillary was up 3 and won by 2.2. That's great. Wisconsin said Hillary was going to win and she lost. So I am very cautious about any complacency at all going into this election, while some are extraordinarily confident. What do you think is the right perspective on the data?
I think caution is better. I would say if the election were tomorrow, Biden would win because I think the polling is so overwhelming in one direction. But the election is not tomorrow, and there's a lot that can happen in the next 90 days. The debates being one of them. That doesn't mean don't debate because that would be an issue in and of itself. But the point is that the conventions haven't happened, the debates haven't happened. We don't know what the economy is going to look like come end of September and October. We don't know whether coronavirus is going to be on the retreat in some sense and getting slightly better, or whether it's getting worse. We don't know the impact of who he picks as a vice president. This is not a situation of George W. Bush in 2008, where George W. Bush had collapsed into the 30s and really the American people had totally written him off. And I don't think it's even at the level of Jimmy Carter, I really admire Jimmy Carter. I think he was an exceptional person. But Trump has been stubbornly at 40, 41, 42. That means if he gets a 5-point swing and gets his approval up to 45, this is a very competitive race. And then you put on top of that this fact that the voter suppression, the difficulty of mail-in ballots, the energetic nature of his base. And I think we have to assume that this is going to be a drag-out fight.
When it comes to the Senate, it looks to me as though if Democrats keep the House, which you are projected to, if Joe Biden were to win, that a lot of what gets done in the next 2 years depends on whether Democrats can take control of the Senate. And I've looked at the races up and down, and certainly there's a path now that is a clearer path than it was 6 and 12 and 18 months ago. What races are you looking at in the Senate, and what's your sense of where that might go?
Well, I think Arizona, we've got a great shot with Mark Kelly. I think in North Carolina with Cunningham, we have a very, very strong shot. I think Susan Collins is in deep trouble. I think Steve Bullock in Montana has made that race much more competitive. Our candidates are doing very well, but I think it largely depends on Biden. I mean, if Biden has the kind of win that his polling currently shows, I think we have a very good chance of carrying the Senate. If this race tightens, as I fear it may, then our chances of getting the sweep we need in Senate seats becomes harder. And it became harder where some of the candidates won, the right candidates from the Republican side in the Kansas primary, and they've been fortunate not to elect some of the most crazy people where we could have had a pickup opportunity.
Last thing I want to touch on, there's been this idea now of, could an election be delayed? What would it look like? What would be the reasons? Are there ways for the president to stay in the Oval Office? And I've tried not to give this more attention than it deserves, because when it comes right down to it, we've not had a federal election delay in the history of this country. On January 20th, Trump stops being president if he's not reelected. And then, a series of other things happen. Is this at all being taken seriously among you and your colleagues? Is there a discussion of this, or is it basically just not being paid attention to?
My concern is not that he's going to delay the election. My concern is that there is a early reporting of election day results which tend to favor Republicans traditionally, and he may have an early lead in one of these battleground states. And then there's delay and not proper counting of absentee ballots. And if you have a few percent election in a place like Florida, in a place like Wisconsin, that there's tremendous pressure put on the state legislatures to certify those states in favor of Trump. So I don't see a situation where the states certify Joe Biden, the House and Senate certify Joe Biden, and Donald Trump stays in the White House. I think a far more risky situation is like 1876, where you actually have state legislatures conspiring with the White House to give the result to Trump on a close call. And that to me is the disenfranchisement and states calling it for Trump are what I think are the deep concerns.
Yeah, I'm not conspiratorial by nature, but after months of railing against vote by mail, when Donald Trump tweeted 2 days ago or 3 days ago, everybody in Florida should vote by mail, my mind immediately goes to what does he know about Ron DeSantis's plans that now all of a sudden make him very into the idea of Florida voting by mail. And I think it goes along the lines you're talking about, which is the role that the state and secretaries of states may have.
Yeah, and I mean, look, he's doesn't even try to give principle any due. I mean, he's basically saying, okay, in the states that I need absentee voting, please vote absentee. In the states where absentee voting may hurt me, don't do it. It's just raw power. But this is, they understand that if it were an election which was clean, where everyone who should be voting and wanting to vote votes, Trump can't overcome those numbers. So the disenfranchisement, the trying to create confusion, and then the biggest risk, I think, is this idea that Donald Trump, imagine if on election day he's up by a couple points in Wisconsin or Florida, even if a week later we know he's going to lose by 4 or 5 points, you could see him declaring victory. And it becomes much harder than for the states where those state legislators are in Trump-heavy districts to do the right thing. And so that I think is the bigger fear of how they would cheat or take the election.
I completely agree, and it's exactly the point that I've been making. Congressman Ro Khanna, representing California's 17th District. Always a pleasure, and I really appreciate your time.
Appreciate it, David. Appreciate all of your commentary, and look forward to being back on.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on the support of our viewers and listeners, and one way to keep us going is through Patreon, where you can pledge as little as $1 per month or as much as you want at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Great perks and benefits as well. Read about them.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So Donald Trump held another one of these press briefings yesterday, and the press briefings are increasingly sort of an outlet for Donald Trump's panic over failed interview after failed interview. On Monday night, the Axios interview that Trump gave to Jonathan Swan was such a train wreck that Trump decided yesterday morning, I'm going to call in to Fox and Friends. That'll be a nice softball interview. Well, we reviewed the Fox and Friends interview, and again, Donald Trump was a complete and total disaster. He seems unable to help himself. So yesterday in the evening, running half an hour late, put him sort of in the evening category here on the East Coast. Trump had another one of these White House press briefings, and it was just unfounded conspiracy after conspiracy. Donald Trump losing all connection with reality. And I want to take a look at some of the key moments. Now, you might remember that on Tuesday, Trump had floated the idea that the explosion in Beirut, Lebanon was an attack. And he also mentioned that it looked like a bomb. Now, at the time, there was no evidence of that whatsoever. It was completely irresponsible for Donald Trump to float that idea. And since, as we learn more about what went on, there continues to be a complete lack of evidence that that is what happened. Donald Trump was asked about it yesterday and multiple times doubled down, floating even more conspiratorial ideas about explosive devices, all with zero evidence. Also, one other thing here that I want you to pay special attention to. You're going to notice that Trump starts referring to Lebanon as that country. He never says the word Lebanon during this entire press briefing. It looks to me that Donald Trump doesn't know that Beirut is in Lebanon. And so he avoids having to make that clear by referring to Lebanon as that country. Pay special attention to that. The primary focus of this clip is Trump's baseless conspiracies.
Beirut. So there's been some question about your comments yesterday saying that it was an attack and that you'd heard from military officials that there was, an explosion, that it looked like some sort of a bomb.
I can tell you, whatever happened, it's terrible, but they don't really know what it is. Nobody knows yet. At this moment, they're looking. It could, how can you say accident? Somebody was, left some terrible explosive type devices and things around. Perhaps it was that. Perhaps it was an attack. I don't think anybody can say right now. We're looking into it very strongly. Right now, it's I mean, you have some people think it was an attack, and you have some people that think it wasn't. In any event, it was a terrible event, and a lot of people were killed, and a tremendous number of people were badly wounded, injured. And we're standing with that country. You know, we have a very good relationship with that country, but it's a country under a lot of turmoil, a lot of problems, but we stand with them.
None of what Donald Trump said there is based in any fact. He says maybe someone left explosive devices. There's no evidence of that. He's just making that up. Some people think it was an attack. There could have been explosive devices. There's no connection to reality whatsoever. Now, you expect this stuff from, the enclaves of the internet that we've all come to sadly be familiar with over the last 3.5 years. But this is the president of the United States just randomly and wildly floating conspiracies that occur to him. Then another one. Here Donald Trump posits, without any evidence, that there was some kind of conspiracy in New York congressional primaries, all to make him look bad. This is just wild and unhinged.
In New York, they had the Carolyn Maloney situation, and I criticized it badly over the last 2 years and 2 days. I mean, I gave it some very, very strong criticism, and all of a sudden, like a miracle, they just approved the winner. Well, what happened? Did the person that was second concede the race, even though it was very close and all mixed up? They have a terrible situation in New York with the ballots, you know that. And as soon as I said, well, I think you should have a new election, because the election, obviously, they're not going to know what to do. I think you should have a new election. They all of a sudden announced a winner. I assume it was her, but they announced a winner. Well, I don't agree with it. Did somebody speak to the person on the other side, the opponent? Did they do something for the opponent on the other side? Take a look at Paterson, New Jersey. Take a look at many things. It's all over newspapers what's going on with the mail-in ballots. They send out millions of ballots. They're totally unprepared to do it. And then they come back in the millions. It's going to be a disaster.
Completely baseless allegations. And remember, Donald Trump keeps talking about vote by mail fraud as a reason not to vote by mail in November. And he points to this New York race. This situation in New York is related to postmarks and mishandling by the city. There has been no voter fraud alleged in this race at all, never mind confirmed. None of that race has anything to do with fraud, and yet Donald Trump is fully in with these baseless conspiracies. Now, then at the end of the press briefing, again, the topic of Beirut was brought up, and Trump sort of stumbles through the answer and abruptly ends the press briefing, again, failing to ever say the word Lebanon. It seems to me Trump doesn't know that Beirut is in Lebanon. And again, saying it could have been a bomb that was set off, despite there being no evidence posited so far.
Esper said today that based on what he had heard, the incident in Beirut he felt was an accident. Now, he's disagreed with you on other things before. Do you have any comment about his remark?
Whatever if that's what he heard, I think that I've heard it both ways too. I've heard accent, I've heard, explosives, and obviously it must have been some form of explosives. But whether it was a bomb intentionally set off, it ended up being a bomb. But no, I've heard it both ways. It could have been an accident, and it could have also been something that was very offensive, and I wouldn't be very happy with that.
And you have no problem with
Just
it.
to follow up on that, Mr. President, even if you just have suspicion that the Beirut explosion is a bomb, do you have any plans of pertaining to U.S. assets in the region, for example? I mean, how are you looking into this?
We're working very closely with the government, and we're working very closely with many different agencies, including the military, and we'll be able to figure it out. We already probably have figured it out. Thank you very much, everybody.
Mr. President,
what did you mean when you said it is what it is?
Abruptly walking off, of course, after floating multiple unfounded conspiracy theories. Now, just a bonus clip here, not a conspiracy per se, but just a wild claim. Donald Trump again talks about, coronavirus is just going to go away.
Sir, you said in an interview this morning on the coronavirus, this thing's going away. It will go away like things go away. despite ongoing cases and death. Isn't that continued claim out of reality?
It's going away. No, it'll go away like things go away. Absolutely. It's no question in my mind. It will go away. Please go ahead. Hopefully sooner rather than later.
Now, what's pernicious about this is that to the non-thinking individual, eventually Trump's going to be right and he's going to get some credit for that. And what I mean by that is, I guess it's conceivable that the coronavirus goes away as a pandemic, but it becomes sort of seasonal like the flu. But in a certain sense, eventually Trump will be right that the pandemic is going to end. Now, Trump has been saying this for months. When we had 15 cases, the president said they would soon be zero. We're now at 5 million. He's been saying it's going to go away for 5 months. At a certain point, he will be right. And there are people in our country so uneducated or so blinded by partisanship that they are going to praise Trump for it. They will say, look, Trump said it was going to go away and it went away. It is weaponized ignorance and aggressive delusion, and it's dangerous. And do you guys think these briefings are helping Trump with some people? Do these briefings help Trump with his base? Or are they doing more harm than good? You'll remember they were stopped for a period of time and then restarted as an idea for helping Donald Trump recover in the polls. He actually has seen slightly better polling since he has restarted these, although to make a causal relationship, we'd have to have a little more information. What do you think? Helping, hurting Trump, no impact, helping with his base, but hurting with everybody else? Curious what you think. You know, I told you over the last few months that Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's the top infectious disease doctor in the country, needs a security detail because of threats against him. And it's really a sort of glimpse, a peek behind the curtain into the problems that we have as a country here in the United States. When the doctor trying to stop the pandemic and save people has so many Americans wanting to hurt him, furious with him, believing that he is trying to hurt Americans, targeting him as some kind of nefarious player in some bizarre amalgam of conspiracy theories involving Bill Gates and microchipping and RFID and all sorts of stuff. He needs security. That's utterly unconscionable. Think about how crazy it is that in most countries, a pandemic comes, everybody defers to the public health officials and to the doctors who specialize in infectious disease. Not in the U.S. In the U.S., the pandemic comes and such a large portion of the country is furious with the doctors that the doctors end up needing security to protect them from Americans. Let that sink in. Well, now it's even worse. It's not just Dr. Fauci who is at risk. Dr. Fauci admitted earlier this week that now his daughters need security to protect them because of the work that Dr. Fauci is doing. Dr. Fauci said he and his family have required continued security in the face of harassment and death threats because people are mad at what he is doing in terms of the coronavirus pandemic. Trump said we have 15 cases, which will be zero soon in March. People are mad at Dr. Fauci and threatening his family. A quote from a recent interview he did with CNN. Commenting on this, Dr. Fauci says, the unseemly things that crises bring out in the world. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm quoting Dr. Fauci. The unseemly things that crises bring out in the world. It brings out the best of people and the worst of people, and getting death threats to my family and harassing my daughters to the point where I have to get security. It's amazing. I wouldn't have imagined in my wildest dreams that people who object to things that are pure public health principles are so set against it and don't like what you say and I say, namely in the world of science, that they actually threaten you. I mean, that to me is just strange. Now, what's really funny here is that Dr. Fauci during this interview refers to there being a degree of anti-science sentiment in the United States. That is quite the understatement. Half the country, according to multiple polls, doesn't even plan to get the coronavirus vaccine if and when it is available to them. But this is a bigger issue. This anti-intellectualism that underlies all of this has been growing for a long time. If you go back and read some of my favorite authors, like the work of Carl Sagan from decades ago, if you look at what Isaac Asimov wrote decades ago, they saw it coming. They've been sounding the alarm about not sort of benign anti-intellectualism and anti-science and rejection of science in the United States. They have been sounding the alarm about the real world impact that it was having and could potentially have significantly more of. They were completely correct. And for all of these folks who talk about, as I mentioned yesterday, Trump derangement syndrome, which is just a term to stymie debate, we, if anything, have been not alarmist enough about this issue of rejection of science, anti-intellectualism, and also pseudo-intellectualism, which presents its own set of risks that I've previously discussed. Instead of revering our doctors and our scientists, they've become enemies for, I mean, would you say it's for 20, 30, 40% of the country? Imagine threatening someone for trying to help the American people. Imagine threatening the children of someone trying to help the American people. And almost every day, Americans find new, novel ways to make the United States a laughingstock and a global embarrassment. And this is, in a sense, as I mentioned, when I mentioned Carl Sagan and Isaac Asimov, this was predicted. This is what happens after, on the one hand, decades of underfunding schools and not prioritizing understanding science and critical thinking and epistemology. And you combine that with the political party, the Republican Party, that benefits from, that raises money on the basis of rejecting science and also religiously based reactionary ideas, although that's not at the core of what we're seeing now with the virus necessarily. There are more components. I'm being overly simplistic, but those are two big, important pieces of the analysis. Imagine what it's like for Dr. Fauci day to day, going to work, trying to deal with a 100-year pandemic, seeing other countries successfully do it, and knowing that not only are we failing because of the president, but that the president is a huge part of why a large portion of the country hates Dr. Fauci, some to the point that they would like to see him dead. Redoubling my sentiments from an earlier segment, we owe the world an explanation and an apology. And by the way, if Trump wanted to stop this, if Donald Trump spent a week saying, leave Dr. Fauci alone, I don't want to hear anything about anybody going after Dr. Fauci or threatening his family. His interest is the health of the American people. If Trump did that, 95, 98, 99% of this would stop. But instead, Trump is actually part of the problem rather than the solution. Imagine being a health expert in the medical field and having death threats hurled at you and your family for trying to protect the public, and having the president of the United States actually foment that treatment rather than tell people to stop and to cut it out, for lack of a better term. It's bad. Really, really bad. We have a voicemail number, which is 219-2-DAVID-P. This is an interesting observation about some of these recent interviews that Donald Trump has been doing. Take a listen.
Hey, David, I was just listening to the Fox and Friends interview or your coverage of that. And I realized that Trump at this point has gotten so bad at interviews, so bad at even the propaganda interviews,
yes,
that they literally have to give him the answer before he answers their question. If you replay the Brian Kilmeade, he asks the question, gives him the answer, and then waits for Trump to just say yes. Basically, yeah, that's what we're going to do. And he still finds a way to mess it all up.
Yes, I have noticed this. Friendly interviewers will, it's sort of like priming a 5-year-old to give you the answer that you know how like when you talk to little kids, just by how you talk to them, you can basically get them to go along with a lot of different things. And you say, hey, little Donnie, do you like, is the apple or the cherry bigger? Right? Which one looks bigger? Does that apple look bigger? Yes. Yes, the apple looks bigger. You're priming answers, and friendly interviewers will do this to Trump, and they'll do it when they ask him these seemingly simple questions like, what is your agenda? Or something about the virus. They give him the answers, And Trump could say, you're absolutely right. That's exactly right. And I'm glad that we're all on the same page. Trump still gets the answers wrong when somebody gives him the answers. And that's an astute observation from our caller. On the bonus show today, Los Angeles is saying they will shut off water and electricity to homes hosting large parties and gatherings in the context of coronavirus. Can they do it? What will happen? We will discuss. Also, New York City, as we are starting to see a resurgence in cases in a lot of different states, New York City is setting up quarantine checkpoints for travelers who are coming in from coronavirus hotspots. Massachusetts is thinking about similar strategies. What is the fall going to look like? And lastly, on top of everything, we've gotten an updated 2020 hurricane forecast, and it looks very bad. And we already saw in Florida what happens when you combine a relatively small hurricane / tropical storm with a coronavirus outbreak. We are going to discuss what happens when it is a major hurricane combined with a coronavirus hotspot. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. I'll see you then or tomorrow. Thanks so much for watching today's full episode of the show. Just a reminder, today's sponsor is Blinkist, the app that lets you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try Blinkist for free and save 25% off of a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've also included the link right underneath this video.